Hello everybody, it is Drake again, and today I'm going to be sharing an experience I had. I went to Vancouver, Canada, otherwise known as the Couve, and it was actually my first time leaving the United States, not for lack of interest, but glad to do that. And so yeah, I'm just going to show some of the books I got and maybe feed in a few anecdotes in there too. But yeah, so I went for a teaching workshop kind of thing. I was lucky enough to, get funneled there through my work, so I didn't have to pay a whole lot for the trip itself. So then that saved more money for books. So anyway, I mainly went to two bookstores in Vancouver. Actually, I only went to two. And that was McLeod's, which is excellent. And then I also went to a bookstore called Hound, which I only got a few books there. All right, well, I will start with the first book I bought in Vancouver, and I got it there on the first day I arrived. So, yeah, McLeod's is where I went, and pretty close to where I was staying, so I just walked down there and I started looking around, and I realized the people in there, they knew what the deal was. They had some good stuff. Turns out the owner wasn't there, but some of these younger guys who work there, they knew a decent amount of stuff too. So I looked around. There was a lot of really fascinating stuff, saw some really cool stuff, but I was adamant I wasn't going to buy too many on the first day, because then that would, I only have a suitcase to take back. So I looked around a little bit, I realized that there was kind of a pattern of authors related to socialism, anarchism, like labor, working class kind of stuff. And so I thought, I'll ask them about this author I've been interested in lately, R.H. Tawney, the English economist / social theorist, something like that, in the early 20th century. And so I did ask them, and one of the workers was like, oh, the name sounds familiar. I definitely think the owners talked to us about him, but I don't know if we have it. And the next thing is he said, but if we do have it, it might be downstairs. Now, I didn't know there was a downstairs because there's a door that says just employees only. And anyway, they let me downstairs where there was a whole like second bookstore with tons of history stuff, historiography, Canadian poetry, and a whole different poetry section. And I just got to wander around there for a little bit, Toynbee and F.R. Scott I saw down there, and just all sorts of interesting stuff, but still no R.H. Tawney. And so I went back upstairs, looked around a little bit more, and then, interestingly enough, I did find, not the book I was looking for, but, it's still interesting. Religion and the Rise of Capitalism by R.H. Tawney, and this is a little paperback from, I believe, the 1930s. And yeah, R.H. Tawney, in this book, he looks at, as the book implies, roughly starting in 1400s or so, he looks at Christian conceptions of usury and greed and, banking and all this kind of stuff. And he continues all the way to the present. And he looks at economics through the lens of virtue and ethics, and which is refreshing. But the book I was looking for, that I read around a little bit, and it seems like his best book, is a book called Equality that he wrote in 1930s, I believe. This one was 1920s. So anyway, R.H. Tawney, Christian socialism is kind of an interesting overlap. And yeah, that got me the golden ticket to go to the secret basement. And so after that, went to the hotel, ran around Vancouver a little bit. And the main thing I noticed with Vancouver, at least for me, is there was a day one Vancouver where, I got a good coffee and I went to the bookstore and I was exhausted and went back to the hotel and just relaxed. And then there was a day 2 Vancouver where I was staying, I guess it's like the financial district right next to this really, Gucci stores and all this kind of stuff. And then if you go a little east, there, just a little bit past the bookstore I went to, interestingly enough, there was a Homer Street and a Melville Street right near the bookstores. If you go a little bit past those, there's about 10 straight blocks of like the most destitute part of a city I've ever seen in my life. Having gone to San Francisco, Los Angeles, all this kind of stuff, I was pretty shocked. And it's hard to ignore that. It should be impossible to ignore it. So that was kind of my day 2 Vancouver that really kind of stuck. And I won't go into too much detail there, but just really like, unforgivable, the state that people are just left to suffer in. And so on day 2, I had to start actually going to my workshop for work, but we ended pretty early. And so I went to McLeod's every single day I was there for 5 days. And I also, which is like just perfect, stars aligning. My buddy Matt lives up there, so I got to hang out with him a little bit, and super into books and movies too, so that was really nice. And then I went back to McLeod's and I got some more stuff. So the second time I went back, I had seen that they had a sale where if you got 3 hardcovers, you got 30% off your entire order. So I got 3 hardcovers, and one of the hardcovers I got that I wasn't like super keen on, but whatever, I need it anyway because I had a paperback of John Donne, but it got ruined. So got an Oxford edition of the poems of John Donne, which, like I said, I needed a copy of his stuff anyway. And so I was pretty thrilled to throw this on. This was 15 Canadian dollars, so not too bad. Then I found hidden away behind a whole stack of books, a book that I had been looking for years. And if you look online, you'll see it's expensive. But I found it, and this one was also 15. Poetry of the Carolingian Renaissance. So this is all poetry that comes from 700, 800, 900 AD, give or take. And I suppose the most famous poet in here is Alcuin, the main scholar of Charlemagne's court. There are also famous people like Einhard, who wrote a biography of Charlemagne. There's also Rabanus Maurus, who Angels and Saints, Elliot Weinberger deals with him a little bit. I think those are the 2 most famous. Let me see if anyone else. Yeah, those are the 2 most famous that I think people will know. But the cool thing about this book is it also shows the Latin that these guys wrote in. So like, medieval Latin rather than a classical Latin that you'd have in Rome. So anyway, thrilled to find this. I've reorganized all my bookshelves, going from like just starting at the shelf 1 is starting with ancient Egypt, Sumeria, including history books, and then all the way to the present. And so this book will find a nice spot on the shelf. Same with the John Donne. And then I threw on a paperback because it looks so interesting. And I was going to get 30% off for it too, and I'll show you the last hardcover I got. But the paperback I got is called Dreamtime, Concerning the Boundary Between Wilderness and Civilization. And I had remembered I had looked into this book, 6 years ago. It must have been when I was looking into Finnegan's Wake, because of the title, inevitably. but it's an interesting work of anthropology, but it's one of those crazy books because the actual book itself is only 133 pages. And then the notes are 400 pages long. No, 350 pages long, plus the bibliography. So it's just like, why did he write it that way? But it also deals with something I've been interested in lately as far as ecology and civilization, and where do people separate themselves from nature? Like, just have this idea of nature's over there and then human society or civilization is over here. And yeah, I think this will be some good reading for that. So I threw that on the order. And then that second day, the last book I got was a work by a guy I think most people have heard of. And it's a 4-volume work that I managed to find. Like I said, though, I think he's a pretty commonly known guy. I think especially if you look into psychology, sociology, or if you know about the history of physics and chemistry, early 20th century, you'll have heard of his name. And that is Vilfredo Pareto. I'm not sure if I'm saying that exactly right, but you can see the book here, The Mind and Society. And as you see, this is volume 1 out of a 4-volume work, as you see here. And this is the first edition of the English translation, which was published in 1935. And then the original Italian was published in 1915. And what I was struck by instantly whenever I picked this up and started skimming through it is just the clarity of his thought first. And then I was just so struck by the main thesis, that at least one of the main theses that he gives in here, that, simplifying it, that the patterns and structures that allow a certain society to succeed, and you could maybe say dominate its environment or thrive, are the same exact patterns and structures that, if they're continued, tend to cause the dissolution of a society. And I just thought that was so fascinating, keeping in mind that it was 1915. So he had written almost all of this, before World War I started, if not all of it. And I get very frustrated with the, maybe not quite obsession, but like the kind of reflex to think about Spengler in that time. And I really have a negative opinion of Spengler. So I wanted to see what else was being written and published at that time that is more intelligent, that I could actually get something out of. And so, yeah, this book is that. And I'm just thrilled with it because I've been interested in these like kind of civilizational scale, sociology, anthropology, kind of massive studies, like Toynbee's A Study of History, Peterum Sorokin, who else fits in here? Historiography in general, so the Mukadima. And so, yeah, that is a thrilling edition. Put that down. And then, I think the next day I didn't buy anything, and then the fourth day I think I also didn't buy anything, but I still went to the bookstore. And McLeod's, all the times I went to McLeod's. And then I realized that there was another bookstore pretty close. One of my coworkers went there and told me about it. And so I decided to go. At this point, though, I had very, vanishingly small luggage space. So I could only really get a couple paperbacks, really thin paperbacks ideally. And so I went to the Hound Bookshop. And as you see, this is their bookmark, very clever. The little dog ear there you can see, folded over. but Paper Hound. And as I had limited myself to, I got some paperbacks. One paperback I had been looking for a while. The greatest female poet in Chinese culture, Li Qingchao, who was around in the Song Dynasty. And this translation is by Kenneth Rexroth and Ling Chung. And Kenneth Rexroth is not one of my favorite poets, but he does have a good ear. So I was pretty pleased to be able to find this. There are other editions of this author's poetry, but this is probably the one I was going to get if I found it. And I did, luckily, and it was very reasonably priced. So this is an excellent addition to my Chinese poetry. And then I also saw this in the same section, this work of Chinese poetry by a contemporary poet, Yan An, A Naturalist's Manner. And this book is perfect for my recent interests of ecology and naturalist thinking, and just the whole trajectory of Chinese poetry that very imaginatively and large-heartedly, you could say, deals with nature and the surroundings, and this book does the same. But like I said, he's contemporary. I think he's maybe in his 50s, maybe in his 60s now at this point. And this is also a press I don't know very well, Chacks Press in Tucson, Arizona. So anyway, Naturalist Manner. And then I also saw that Paper Hound, it was an interesting bookstore. It was very curated compared to McLeod's. McLeod's is one of those bookstores where there's just like piles and piles and just dust on everything, and you know, you really have to spend time in there to figure out what they have, and that's why I kept going every day. Paper Hound, exact opposite. Shelves were named, there might only be 30 books in a certain category, and the book buyer, or the owner, had a particular eye for a certain kind of writing or book. So he had a whole like 3 shelf section on the beats. He had a whole stack and half of a shelf on Edward Gorey, things that Edward Gorey illustrated or wrote. He also liked Edith Sitwell, this English eccentric author from the mid-20th century, early to mid-20th century. And a book caught my eye in the Edward Gorey section. It's one of these Anchor paperbacks, double-day Anchor book. And it's a book I had heard of in an unsavory context. But the reason I'm interested in this book, which is The Ancient City, is that when I was reading about it, it became influential in French historical and anthropological circles. And I'm interested in the section of French historians and anthropologists contemporary with this author, who lived 1830 to 1889, and then after. So, what's that French author's name who wrote about the French Revolution? Dang, the really famous one that's a multi-volume history. I can't remember right now. It'll come to me probably right as I finish the video. But Claude Lévi-Strauss and Ferdinand Braudel and these kind of people. So I was curious to see what this guy's doing here, and I also think it'll be a pretty quick read. And also so I can combat the unsavory interest in this book. So that's one. And also you can see the Edward Gorey. Edward Gorey is always interesting. And then I went back to McLeod's on the very last day with my buddy Matt. We both went there. He ended up getting The Arcades Project by Benjamin, and also the book Civilization by Kenneth Clark. Both really interesting books. I have a copy of The Arcades Project, but not the Kenneth Clark, though I've been interested in him for a while. And I had left a little index card. That's the way they do it. If the owner's not there, you write your book you want on an index card if you can't find it, and then they look for it. And I had given that index card like a couple days ago, and I asked about it, and it was like, oh, I don't know, I guess we must not have it, you know. But I thought, screw it, I'll ask the owner and see if they have it, because what's the worst thing he can do? He can say, oh, I already told you I don't have it, or he can have it. And so I just went ahead and asked him. And he kind of thought for a second, and he knew the book I was talking about, called Lohuntan's Voyage. It's a travel journal from 1703 in the French, and then there was an English translation. And I actually found out about this book through my buddy Matt, who read The Dawn of Everything. And this guy is mentioned, the Lohuntan, but then also the main figure in Lohuntan's Voyage is a Native American guy named Kondiaronk in real life. That was his name. The Europeans, the French, called him the Rat. And then he is fictionalized in Lohuntan's Voyage as the name Adario. And the description of him was so fascinating. And so I'd been looking for this book for a while. Also, one of my recent interests has been looking at European colonization, but from a Native American perspective, you know, the discovery of the Europeans, so to say. And 1703 is still early enough, especially in the region where this all took place, Newfoundland, northern New York State, modern day where New York State is, this kind of area with all the Great Lakes and all that. So I'd been looking for this book, couldn't find it anywhere. Online it's like, you know, $200 or something, and I was like, you know, I don't know if I want it that much. Anyway, I asked the owner, oh, I think I have it. He goes out to his storage unit across the street that we weren't allowed in, unfortunately. And he comes back, sure enough, he has a copy of it. But it's not just any copy. So there's an English edition from 1905 that is a 2-volume facsimile. But there's also another one that I had never seen, a Canadian edition from 1932 called just Lohuntan's Voyage, little slim kind of hardcover, kind of flexible hardcover. But the owner started telling me the story behind this book. So the story behind this book is that it was owned by a Canadian magazine publisher named Clifford Wilson, I believe is the name there. And this was his copy. He annotated it thoroughly. And he was an outdoorsman and travel writer and, you know, a canoe person in Canada, had this magazine. And he fully read through this book, annotated it, but beyond annotating it, he somehow got a hold of the 1703 edition, cut out pages from it, and folded them in. So this sheet of paper I'm holding here is from 1703, from the original French edition. And as you see, this has like a map of a settlement. And there are just all sorts of pages like this scattered throughout. I'm assuming they're from the correct sections that they were in the book. Here's another one of Lake Huron, Lake Erie, Pays des Anglais, the land of the English. See that? So this is also 1703. And then another really cool thing that this guy did is that he traced a map on really thin tracing paper of the entire region that Lohuntan traveled. This is Lohuntan's map. And it's interesting too, because all of the lakes and rivers are magnified because of course they're traveling by lake and river. They're not traveling by land. So traveling by lake and river gives the impression that the land is very slim compared to the lake and river. So, you know, in real life, the lake is this big, and then there's a big chunk of land on top. But if you're only traveling in the lake and you see the borders of the lake, you think the lake is huge, and then there's just a sliver of land between this and the other lake or the river. And so anyway, Lohuntun's Voyage, fascinating book. And the section with Addario, with this fictionalized version of Kondiaronk, is extremely fascinating because it's from 1703. And what does Baron Lohuntun do? He gets in a debate with Addario, who was famous for his rhetorical skill, extremely intelligent, was a very skilled orator. And Lohuntun is trying to convince Addario to be a Christian, to convert to Christianity. And Addario's arguments are just like striking as far as how clear they are and reasonable they are. And supposedly from the introduction, that's why the book got kind of panned and wasn't as well known as maybe it should have been, because he basically made the Native American guy too intelligent and made the argument against Christianity too well. And that's just fascinating. I mean, in 1703, that region up there with the Iroquois, Kondiaronk was not Iroquois, but he was involved with them a lot, being where he was. So anyway, that's my last book that I got in Vancouver. Barely fit everything in my suitcase, and I was checked by security on my way back. A couple other cool things I did in Vancouver. I got 8 triple O's. I got an iced cap from Tim Hortons. I had to go to Tim Hortons. We went to the UBC Museum of Anthropology, and I got to see some of Bill Reed's cedar sculptures, wood sculptures, which was awesome. His masterpiece sculpture they have in this rotunda. Got to go in this park of 100-foot tall evergreen trees, and that was just awesome too. The weather was amazing, like mid-70s Fahrenheit. And yeah, it was overall a good trip, minus the day 2 impression that I couldn't shake. But yeah, overall, really good trip, And then I'll just tag on here at the very end of this, 2 books that were waiting for me when I came back. 2 books I had ordered because of my kind of current interest in ecology and all this kind of thing. 2 books I've been interested in for years now. Steady State Economics by Herman Daly, and this is the 2nd edition, published by Island Press in the early 90s. And also The Entropy Law and the Economic Process by Nicholas Georgescu-Roegen, which is from the early 70s. The first edition of Steady State Economics was late 70s. These 2 people knew each other. Herman Daly studied with Georgescu-Roegen. But yeah, interested in different economic arrangements, steady state economics, ecological economics, as they say. And yeah, it just fits in with my current interests. So figured I'd throw those in there too as a little treat. Yeah, I've been reading a lot. It's been summer break. Super hot outside in Texas, so I've been staying inside a lot and reading. And yeah, things could be a lot worse than they are. So anyway, all right, well, let me know if you are interested in any of these books, if you strongly recommend I read one before the other. And yeah, death is a gang boss.